Elsie Jensen here. Today we are going to bake up a loaf of sourdough. We're going to make some beef and cabbage soup and whip up a batch of chocolate chip cookies that we can chill for tonight to bake up because my chocolate chip cookies have to chill for that perfect, chewy, delicious chocolate chip cookie. So I've had this guy sitting in the fridge for like 3 days now, so I was like, I've got to get him out and baked on there. So we're going to bake him up. It's just a traditional sourdough here. And there we go. Lovely. And let's do our little scores here. So I'm going to just do kind of a crisscross. And then we'll do kind of like a Christmas tree going down. We'll do this if I can do it upside down. And we'll do it over here as well. And then we're going to get these in my Dutch oven that I preheated to 400 or 500 degrees for the last, it's been only in there for like 35 minutes, but that should be good enough. There we go. Make these a little bit wider. Let's get this guy in our oven so he can bake up. Snug fit. And we're going to put the lid on and we're going to bake it at 500 degrees for 20 minutes with the lid on. That's going to seal in the moisture and make like it kind of blonde. And then we take the lid off and we'll cook it for 20 minutes at 450 with it off. So let's slide that guy in there, set my timer.
And what kind of sourdough loaf?
This is a traditional, so just a plain sourdough loaf on there. I have another one in the fridge that I need to bake up too, which has my strawberry swirl, which I think I'm going to bake up for dinner tonight to be kind of a dessert loaf. But let's get our, we're going to get our chuck roast cut up and start searing off for our soup today. So we're going to, I kind of trimmed it up because I'm making a smaller batch of soup because both my parents are out of town. So we're going to sear up. I've got about a little over a pound of chuck roast here. We're going to cube it, and then I'm going to take off a little fat and season it up for us to sear off. And then we'll cook. We'll give our veggies a good saute, and we're gonna have a nice kind of a tomato base to our broth here because I feel like it goes really well with the classic cabbage and beef soup. Go. So again, take off any big chunks of fat. That's just going to be rubbery in your soup. Here, I'm using a chuck roast, but you can also use, soup meat, which is typically just leftover scraps that the butcher has, and kind of throws it all together. So you can also use that as well. Get these in nice little bite-sized chunks. But today is such a soup day. It is very, very cold, and we had, I guess, you can consider it our first snow here because we had some flurries this morning on there, and I'm sure my kids were probably like, why wasn't school canceled? Because school cancels here for like the prediction of snow at times, but just a couple little short-lived flurries, but very cold. But then I heard we're going to be back up in the 70s later this week, so I'm looking forward to that because I am not ready for 30-degree weather. It was too cold this morning. I was working out and I have like my exercise machines in the garage and my hands were so cold. I was like, oh, I'm gonna have to use gloves now. Okay, let's clear this off. I'm gonna get again, just taking off this fat. We are going to do a very simple seasoning on here. I'm gonna use some thyme, onion powder, Mrs. Dash's table blend, black pepper, garlic salt. So just kind of really nice, simple spices. Nothing in there that's too strong or bold, but that will just kind of play well with the cabbage and the beef and everything. And then we're gonna whip up the cookie dough for our chocolate chip cookies, because for the best cookie, that stays nice and chewy and delicious. You've got to chill your dough for, you know, I like to say at least like 2 hours. But I find if I prep it up at like lunchtime, then it's perfect for making my cookies at dinner time. I'm going to trim off this last little bit of fat here. There we go. So we've got our beef trimmed up. I'm going to wash my hands. We're going to season up these guys, and then we're going to sear them off in our Dutch oven. I grabbed my smaller Dutch oven today. I always feel like if I go smaller, it helps me make a smaller size. And since we're just kind of making it for my husband and I, and then whatever the kids want when they come home, they always like to have a little snacky snack. So put in about 1.5 teaspoons of olive oil in there to start heating up. And we're going to season everything with some onion powder. This is going to give it a nice kind of lovely little sear, like crispy edge on it, as well as just some great flavor. So a good amount, like a tablespoon. And we're going to use about 1 teaspoon of dried thyme. So a couple good shaky shakes. And then we'll use our tongs to make sure every piece gets coated up. And then we're gonna also use a little bit of paprika. This is just gonna pair well with that tomato-based broth. And then Mrs. Dash's table blend. This is kind of like an everything seasoning, but I really like it because it's finely ground so that none of those spices are really big. And then we're gonna add in about 1/2 teaspoon of black pepper. Go. And then last but definitely not least, a little sprinkle of garlic salt over. And now I'm going to take my tongs and I'm going to really kind of coat them all up with the spices and herbs on there. That's kind of left over on my cutting board, so every bit gets these nice seared off things. And the nice thing about it is any of these spices that come off in the searing off process will be incorporated into our broth, because we're going to be using those kind of the meat drippings and the spices as well.
You have a question? What's the base of the soup?
The base is going to be a beef broth with tomato paste, so it will be like a beefy tomato base in the broth of it. We're going to have cabbage, carrots, celery, tomatoes, and onions in our soup, so just our kind of a basic, simple beef and cabbage stew. We're using purple cabbage, which I always find hilarious when you make the soup because it will turn the broth purple, but it's delicious nonetheless. Using a tomato base with it kind of hides a little bit of that purpleness though. Okay, let's see if these are warmed up. It might take a little bit longer because I always store my Le Creuset pots outside and they are very cold. Okay, we're gonna pop our meat in here. I might have to do it in 2 batches because again, I don't want to just dump it all in and have it crowded. When it's searing off, you want each piece to get its, you know, nice little spot on there. So we're gonna sear these off. And then I'm gonna go run and grab an onion because I realized that we're gonna have that nice and seared there, cooking off in there. Realize. Here we go. And more onions. Beautiful. Okay, with our meat, we're gonna sear them off on both sides pretty, like for about, we wanna cook them to about a medium rare. You don't wanna overcook them because then they'll be tough and chewy in there. So about, you know, 1 minute to 1.5 minutes on each side until they're all kind of brown. They should get a lovely sear off on them. Got a little plate to put these on. And this just allows you to have a really delicious, tender piece of meat in your stew or your soup without having to cook it for a really long time. on there, because I find with chuck roast, it's gonna go from being like super tender to being tough to tender again, where it falls apart.
You get a request to go over the spices and seasoning?
Yes. So right now we have on here about a tablespoon of onion powder, and then a teaspoon of dried thyme, half a teaspoon of black pepper, about a teaspoon of garlic salt, and about a teaspoon of Mrs. Dash's table blend, and a half a teaspoon of paprika. So just some really great kind of savory flavors that are just going to pair well with the tomato base in here. Okay, I've got them all seared off and flipped over on one side here, and they'll cook pretty quickly. And while we're waiting for those to sear off, I'm going to cut up my onion so that it will be prepped and ready to go in to our meat drippings after I've seared off those bits of meat. So one yellow onion here, just cut off and then just remove this whole outer layer until you have just the nice onion left. And then we're going to do a small dice up on our onion for our soup. And that way we can get a nice little caramelization on it. We'll throw in our carrots and our celery after that. Put this dice up, and then we're going to take our bits of meat out. Again, we kind of want to cook them to where they're nice and red on the inside. And like a, not red, but pink with a little bit of red, so they're about a medium rare. Now these will go right back into our broth and continue to cook up a little bit, but you don't want to overcook them. And they're getting a nice and lovely sear off on them from that, that onion powder just gives them a nice crust. I'm going to put a smidge more olive oil in here.
You have a question? Why do you store your pots outside?
Because I have way too many of them. I have like 30 Le Creuset pots. I have so many of them. And they just don't fit all inside, so I just kind of store them out. It's like my butler's pantry outside on there, because I have a ridiculous amount of cooking stuff. And I don't like it to take up prime real estate if it's not something I use all the time. Which is funny because I do use my Dutch ovens all the time, but they're heavy in there. And even though I have a good sized kitchen, I find you always need more space. More space. Part of me was like, when we were doing it, I said maybe I should have extended the whole kitchen that way, but I actually really love how I have kind of a nice cozy dining room on that end. But I'm like, could have had more cabinets, could have had more countertops to have more stuff. Okay, let's sear these guys off. And then we've got them over again. I've got this over a medium heat now that my Dutch oven is nice and hot. And we're gonna let that sear off for about a minute before we flip it. While we're waiting, we can start working on our chocolate chip cookie base to this. So these are just the best chocolate chip cookies ever. And I really want to say they're a really simple recipe, but what makes them so good is chilling the dough. It's an extra step, but it is a necessary step because it's going to give you that perfect chewy cookie that stays chewy and doesn't dry out. So we're going to start with a cup of butter, which is 2 sticks. And I find doing it in your stand mixer is much easier. We're just going to start creaming that. You want to use room temperature butter so that the sugar will incorporate into it a little bit easier. Flip our little meat chunks here and sear them off on this side. Beautiful. And again, our goal is to cook these to about a medium rare so that they are in the soup, they'll be delicious, and the cameraman says they are delicious. There we go. Flip these guys over. And also knowing that When you take them off, they're gonna continue to cook a little bit more on the plate, and then when we throw them back into our soup at the end, they will cook some more. So really be careful not to overcook them. Okay, while those are searing off, we're gonna do our sugars. We are going to do equal parts brown sugar and granulated sugar, and we need 3/4 of a cup of each. So, and I like to use light brown sugar because I find dark brown sugar gives these too much of a molasses flavor, which doesn't fit the chocolate chip cookies. So we need 3/4 of a cup of brown sugar and light brown sugar for that. And then 3/4 of a cup of granulated sugar.
Oh, you have a question? Do you ever make the brown butter chocolate chip cookies?
I do. I have made them a couple of times, and I do really love them, except it just takes a whole extra step of browning the butter to do it. But I actually made a couple I made a brown butter pumpkin chocolate chip cookie a couple weeks ago, which were fabulous. So I do. It's just, got to remember to brown the butter, and then you have to chill. So it's like a step that you have to do like 2 hours before, which I'm not that put together for. Okay, I've got our meat seared off here, so I'm going to take this batch out. And then we're going to put our onions in to start sauteing up in these lovely meat drippings, which is going to be the great flavor base for our soup. There we go. So I've got our nice little seared off meat. And I've got my Dutch oven on about a 3, 4 right now. Let's add in our onions. We're gonna let them saute. I'm gonna grab a spoon now here instead of my tongs. I'm gonna wash my hands. Got some onion juices on it. So I'm gonna just kind of coat all of my onions up. I'm gonna add a little bit more olive oil in here, about a teaspoon. So altogether, I think I've used about a tablespoon altogether. Just adding it in batches allows it not all to get kind of stuck up on one time or with the meat. Beautiful. And now we're gonna saute off our onions here. Again, over like a medium-low temperature. You can see those meat drippings are giving them a lovely color. Okay, we've got our sugar, so I have 3/4 of a cup of brown sugar and 3/4 of a cup of granulated sugar with our cup of butter. We're gonna cream these together. And again, room temperature butter is the key to making sure that it creams together very just perfect. And then I'm just gonna use my spatula here and press down any that has kind of stuck to the sides of my bowl. There we go. It's already come together. I will say avoid cold butter because it is very hard and takes forever to cream together perfectly. And one thing that if your butter and your sugars are not creamed together well, what will happen is you'll have cookies that are kind of unevenly baked because there will be butter spots in some, which will make them thinner and more runny. So I find it's really important to cream it together and make sure you get there. We've added in 2 eggs. And then we're gonna also add in 1 tablespoon of vanilla extract. Before we mix that though, let me get my onions a good stir here. Beautiful. When we add in our broth, we'll deglaze the bottom of our pan, which will bring up those lovely meat drippings and give it a nice amber color to our broth. Let's get our carrots peeled and diced and our celery peeled and diced that we can add in there, and then we'll continue on with our cookies. So I've got about 4 carrots here, which is really equal to probably 2.5 good-sized carrots.
Did everyone, including the kids, enjoy the game hens last night?
Yes, they were fantastic. It was so funny. My daughter even like took a picture and like snapped her friends to show them the game hen and whatnot. Teddy came up and he actually ended up splitting his with Evie because they don't eat quite as much. They're little. But he was like, ooh, and he thought he was getting this whole big hen to himself. And I was like, buddy, you're not going to eat it all. But everybody loved it. They were so juicy, and it just always made me like, why haven't I made this again more recently? Because I only make them like once or like a year or so, but they're so good and juicy. And I mean, the kids, they all ate them so well. So I'm definitely going to have to do them again instead of just waiting an entire year for them. But they were delicious. Everyone said I seasoned them the best this time, so I'm going to have to remember which spice blend I use next time I make them, because they were delicious. It was just one of those, such a nice, perfect Sunday dinner. Okay, we're gonna dice up our carrots here, and we'll add them in with our onions, let them start to cook up, and then I'm also gonna dice up our celery so we can get that going. And then we will work on our cookie dough, which is also, hopefully, enough will survive to dinner. My kids love eating the cookie dough just straight up. We're gonna add in our diced up carrots. We'll give them a good stir, and then we're gonna dice up some celery and add in here. And this is gonna give us a really aromatic broth to our soup. There we go. And again, we have all of those lovely brown bits at the bottom of our soup from sauteing off our meat, our beef here. Okay, well, before we get this, let me turn that down. Let's go over and take the lid off of our sourdough because it is calling us. So we baked for 20 minutes at 500, and now we're going to take our lid off and bake for 20 minutes at 450. Let's go right here and look at our gorgeous sourdough. Nice. It almost peeked all the way up to the top of my my little Dutch oven here. I'm gonna have to bake it up in a smaller one or a bigger one next time. Okay, slide that guy back there. We're gonna bring our oven temperature down to 450, and then 20 minutes. Okay, this is gonna be perfect. I love just nice warm sourdough bread to eat with soup. It's just so good. I almost thought about, oh, I wonder if I could shape this big bowl into some mini bowls, and I was like, I probably wouldn't turn out, so I'll have to do that next time because sourdough bowls are delicious. Okay, I've got about, I would consider this maybe like 3 good sized stalks of celery. We are going to keep the leaves on because they add a great aromatic flavor to it. I did cut them down the middle of the stalk so that we're gonna have more smaller pieces of celery because I just don't like having a giant piece of celery in my soup, but more smaller bits that add great flavor, but you're not stuck with this one massive piece of celery. There we go. So we're gonna add these in here, and then we're gonna let our onions, carrots, and celery saute up together. Now this helps cut down, it brings out their flavors more than if you just throw them into a broth. It really makes it such a rich flavor for it. It also starts the cooking process, so they don't need to take as long to, you know, cook up when you add the broth in. Here we go. Okay, we're gonna let those cook up here. Let's work on our cookie dough. At least our next part of it. So we added in 2 eggs. So far we've got 1 cup of butter, which is 2 sticks, 3/4 cup of brown sugar, 3/4 3/4 cup of granulated sugar, and then 2 eggs. And then we're also gonna add in 1 tablespoon of vanilla extract. And you've gotta use a tablespoon. This just gives the cookies the best flavor. So let's cream these guys. Our eggs into our butter and our vanilla into our butter and sugar mixture. And you want to do it until it's all mixed in. Perfect. And then we're going to add in a teaspoon of baking soda and a teaspoon of salt. Now, I add them into my wet mixture so I don't have to sift them into my flour.
Babs requests you go over what's in the cookies one more time.
One more time, yes. So we started off with a cup of soft, like room temperature butter, and then we added in 3/4 a cup of granulated sugar and 3/4 a cup of brown sugar. Now we have 2 eggs in there and a tablespoon of vanilla. And now we're going to add in a teaspoon of baking soda and a teaspoon of salt. We're going to cream these together, and you want to make sure that baking soda gets everywhere in there. I like to add it into my wet mixture before the flour, that way I don't have to sift it together. You just make sure it gets mixed up well.
And was that baking soda or powder?
Baking soda. So you want the baking soda. Baking powder would give you a very different texture to your cookie. It gives you more of a fluffy cookie. Let's give this a nice stir. And before you, there we go. Let's add in, before we add our flour and our next thing into our base, let's add in our spices and our tomato paste. And then once we have our broth in, we'll add in our cabbage and our tomatoes. But those are not ones that I saute up for it. Let me grab my can opener here. And we'll open up our tomato paste. We're going to use a good tablespoon size of our tomato paste. It's going to add just great flavor and richness to the broth without having to have it, too tomatoey in there. But let's add some spices. We're gonna add some Mrs. Dash's table blend. We're gonna do about a 1/2 teaspoon. These are the same spices that we used on our meat. We're gonna add in some thyme, about a 1/2 teaspoon. A little more black pepper, about a 1/2 teaspoon. And then, one thing we did not have on our meat, we're going to add in 2 bay leaves. And then we just need a splash of paprika, about a 1/2 teaspoon. This is going to also give it a nice lovely color. And we're not adding onion powder on here because we have the onions in here, and so we don't need it. But we're going to kind of coat these guys up. Let them kind of hit that heat and that oil for a second. And then we're going to add in a nice big heaping spoonful of tomato paste. And we're going to let it saute for a second. So it's like a little bit over a tablespoon. It's a good heaping one. This is going to give it a really wonderful tomato flavor to our broth without making it too heavy. Okay. We'll let that cook up for just a second. Really let those flavors come in. Beautiful. And I always let it heat up for a little bit because it's going to bring in some more, richness to the broth. It also helps take off those brown bits at the bottom. Okay, now we're going to add in 2 1/4 cups of all-purpose flour to our kind of butter sugar base. So, 1. And now we're going to add in 1/4 cup more. And make sure you don't add too much flour because Too much flour is gonna give you, again, a cake-like cookie versus a nice, chewy, rich, delicious one. And we're gonna mix our flour into our butter mixture. And then let me push down, because your butter mixture likes to stick to the side. So we'll push it down and then we'll mix it some more until it's all incorporated. But it's gonna make a nice, lovely paste. And then we'll add in our cookies, or not our cookies, our chocolate chips. And that will have our base.
Question, can you over mix cookie dough?
You can, yes, you can over mix it where you hit the eggs too much, but it takes a while to over mix it. But it's not something you want to walk away and come back in 30 minutes, because yes, you can whip your eggs too much for it, but that takes a lot of work on there. But I find, you know, once it's kind of incorporated, it's perfect. You want to make sure all of those ingredients are well mixed together, but yes, you don't want to whip it forever. Okay, let's, before we add our chocolate chips in there, let's add our broth, which is going to be water with beef bouillon, into our base right here. We're going to start by adding in about a cup first, and then we're going to just kind of mix everything. Make sure you scrape the bottom of your pan to lift off any of those tasty bits, and kind of scrape around to bring everything. As you can see, it kind of rehydrates that tomato to make it almost like a sauce here. We'll add in another cup. And I always go slow with this, so I don't flood my, my base here. Because then it just doesn't combine as well. It doesn't marry in and just make delicious broth as well. Add in another cup. There we go. And then we'll add in our last kind of big one for it. And we'll see we have this just lovely, rich kind of tomato base to it. And now we're going to add in a scoop of our beef bouillon to flavor it up. Now you can always use beef broth if you want to, but I do find that beef bouillon gives you a bit more flavor for it. So we're going to add in a nice big tablespoon. We'll mix it in. This is going to give you the saltiness to your soup as well, so you shouldn't need to add any extra salt.
You got asked if your mixer has a name. Apparently people name their stand mixers.
My mixer doesn't have a name, but now I'm intrigued. I think we'll have to think of a name for him. I feel like Chuck would be a great name for him.
I said Sir Mix-a-Lot.
Oh, I love it, Sir Mix-a-Lot. That his name is Sir Mix-a-Lot. He has been knighted. Okay, we've got our little base in here. We're gonna turn our soup now up to high. We're gonna let it simmer there. I'm gonna prep up my cabbage and my tomatoes to throw in there. We'll add our cabbage in last because cabbage, if you cook it too long, it can like get mushy. We have a random selection of tomatoes from my garden here that we are going to add into our soup for this.
And what about your sourdough starter? Do you have a name for that?
I do. So I have two. I have a fat sourdough starter whose name is Gus Gus. And I have decided that I'm going to make him clothes and a hat so that he looks like Gus Gus the mouse. And then we have a tall, skinny one whose name is Jacques, because that's the other mouse in Cinderella. And I just think they need to have matching hats and clothes because they're just an integral part of our life here. Okay, I'm going to slice up my tomatoes here. To add in here. You essentially can use a can of diced tomatoes if you want, or about 3 to 4 fresh tomatoes. I had so many cherry tomatoes, and they're like, if you don't have tomatoes, if you don't eat them right away, they're not as good eaten fresh. So that's kind of where we are with them right now.
Have you ever considered dehydrating your starter to sell it?
I've thought about that. I just, I've used a dehydrated starter before and I had no luck with it. And so I find that like making it yourself at home, it's not difficult. And you can, I think it teaches you a lot about sourdough in the process. So I feel like it's one of those journeys that I feel like everybody should actually like do and start and take on. I do have videos and recipe cards on how you can make your own starter, as well as, you know, like a tutorial, because it's just like a 7-day process. And it's not hard. You just need to like make sure you're using unbleached flour and all that jazz on there. But it's one of those things I had it about it. Like I even look at my, whenever I was cleaning out like the fridge, woo, that was a juicy tomato at my mom's house, and I found like she had some dehydrated starter there, and I was just like, she's never gonna make sourdough with it. But I just don't, you know, I always just wonder how much work you have to do with a dehydrated sourdough that are you essentially doing the same amount of work creating it yourself. Okay, we added in our tomatoes here, especially that really juicy one. We're gonna give it a nice little mix up into our base. Let's add our chocolate chips into our cookie dough. And then we can chop up our cabbage, or let's add our cabbage. Let's get our cabbage in first. Now I don't need all of this, we're not gonna use all of this cabbage in here. I am going to take off these top leaves because they're not as nice in this. If you're gonna make cabbage rolls, these are beautiful. So I'm actually gonna save them because I might make cabbage rolls. Sometimes I save them and then they'll last forever in my fridge and I can use them. For this soup, you don't need a whole lot of cabbage. We're just gonna take off like a chunk this big, which will spread out to be a lot in our soup.
You have a question? If you use bigger tomatoes, how many would you use?
I would say about 3 tomatoes for the bigger ones, or 1 can of diced tomatoes for it. That would be, you know, right. And for the medium size, you could use like 4 plum tomatoes for it. Okay, we've got our cabbage. You want to kind of dice it up because cabbage, if you leave that leaves in there, it will be very difficult to eat in your soup. Now, green cabbage will not change the color of your broth. Purple cabbage will give your broth a purplish blue tint, which makes it even cooler. Now, having already a tomato base, it won't impact it as much, but when I have done more like basic beef and cabbage stews that don't have a tomato base to it, it is kind of cool to see because it gets more blue like the next day. I'm gonna taste my broth. Delicious. I'm gonna turn it. We're gonna let that simmer, then we'll add in our beef chunks there. Let's finish up our cookies for this. Now, we're not baking them up now. We're going to chill them and bake them up tonight. But if you wanted to bake these cookies up, you bake them at 375 for 9 minutes. And that's gonna give you the perfect thing. Let me get the scissors here. Now, you're gonna use a full bag of chocolate chips. You can use the chocolate chips of your choice. I would stick with semi-sweet because I think milk chocolate makes your cookies too sweet. Favorite ones work, or chocolate chunks. We're gonna put them in here and we're gonna give them a nice mix.
And how much flour was in there?
2 1/4 cups of all-purpose flour. We'll give this a nice mix. And you don't need much to mix it. I find don't over mix with your mixer if you add the chocolate chips in, because they'll crush your chocolate chips. But look at this gorgeous, delicious cookie dough. Now the trick is making sure my kids don't eat it all before I can bake it up. I've had that happen before, and I'm like, we have to bake up some cookies. We can't just eat all the cookie dough. And the kids are like, no, we can. There we go.
For your cookie size, like a tablespoon or bigger?
I like to make mine out to be about a golf, like a ping pong ball size. So like a tablespoon, maybe a little bigger. I like it, you know, when they bake up, my cookies are like that big. I don't do the massive jumbo cookies unless I'm making my crumble cookie copycat recipe. That I do the big, huge ones because it is a slightly different recipe and you have to alter ingredients to get those big fat cookies. So these are more small, like that one's when they bake up, but I use, I would say like a gumball size piece of dough for it. Okay, this dough, what you're gonna do is you're gonna chill it in the fridge for at least 2 hours. And that dough is gonna be firm when you scoop it up and roll it into balls. So when I bake it up, I typically bake 1 sheet at a time. I pop the dough back in the fridge during that process for it.
And what's your best tip to keep the cookies from spreading too much?
So chilling the dough. So bake at 375 for 9 minutes. With the dough chilled, your cookies will not, because it's cold, which means it's not going to melt as fast, which gives you that perfect, chewy, delicious cookie that doesn't ever dry out or get crispy. These are like the best chocolate chip cookies, and the trick is chilling the dough. Here is our beautiful base to our soup. I've turned it down nice and low. We're gonna add in our beef chunks here. And this is our chuck roast that we cubed up and we seasoned with thyme, Mrs. Dash's table blend, onion powder, paprika, garlic, salt, black pepper. We're gonna add them into our soup. Add all those little bits of juices too that have, seeped out, because that is gonna give you the wonderful flavor. Here we go. We're gonna mix it up. And you can see my broth actually kind of already has a little bit of a purple tint to it, but it gets even richer in color as the more it kind of cooks here. I'm gonna take, now that we have the meat in, I'm gonna take one more taste. I don't think I need to add anything else. I think it's perfect. We'll let that simmer out slowly. When you do bake up your cookies, you want to make sure you bake them on parchment paper that also prevents them from spreading out here. So we will be baking these up tonight on our dinner time stream, but for those of you, this is about the size of a cookie ball that I will bake up.
And do you know what you're doing yet for dinner?
I actually have an idea. I think I might be doing fried fish sandwiches. I have tilapia. My husband's like, fish, of course. But I have tilapia, and I always feel like a fried fish sandwich and a cookie might do really well. But it could change. I think that would be delicious, but we'll see. I got nice brioche buns, so we're having it sometime this week.
Request to see the size again.
So you're just gonna roll a ball about that big. So like a gumball, ping pong ball size on there. Don't get too big because again, they're gonna be chilled and cool. Do not bake it up until you have it chilled, because if you bake it up now, it will run out thinner. Okay, let's go. I'm gonna slide this over here.
A lot of people say they like the fish sandwich idea, so.
I see, it's delicious. My husband just needs to get over himself. I don't know what he has against ocean creatures, because fish is delicious. Okay, let's go grab our sourdough out of the oven, because it has less than 15 seconds on it. Okay. So we baked it for the last 20 minutes at 450. Pull this baby out. Look at that gorgeous sourdough. We're gonna come and we're gonna put it on a cutting board, and then when you bake it up, make sure you take it out of your Dutch oven fairly quickly so that the bottom of your bread does not continue to bake. Your Dutch oven, since it's cast iron, retains its heat for a long time, which means it's going to continue cooking it. So just lift this guy up and out. Look at that perfect kind of golden brown on there, not too dark. I always do what I like to say is a blonde bake. So 20 minutes gives you this just nice, lovely, light color to it. And the reason why I like not cooking it so dark is it keeps the outer shell of your bread more chewy, less crunchy. If you bake it longer, and you can do it up to 30 minutes, gives you a darker one, and you'll have a really crunchy crust on here. Now, also with sourdough, when you take it out of the oven, you need to let it sit for about 10 minutes before cutting into it. If you cut into your sourdough too soon, it's going to get gummy because it hasn't released all of its natural steam. Well, guys, we are ready to serve up our lunch here. So let me grab a bowl. And we're also going to be serving this with a little bit of grated Parmesan cheese on the top. So let me grab my little thing for that, and then of course our sourdough bread. Let me slide this, guys, out of the way. We'll put our beautiful bread up here. And let me grab a ladle.
Before you start, question about sourdough starters. They put their starter in the fridge 8 months ago. Start over or feed until it comes back?
I would probably start over. I typically keep mine in the fridge if I'm gonna do it for like 2 weeks. So like if we go on vacation, it's probably gonna be molded in the fridge or discolored. So I would start over on there, and because otherwise you probably have to rehab it for the same amount of time anyways if it wasn't bad. Okay, let's serve up our lunch today. For lunch, we have our delicious beef and cabbage soup. We seared or sauteed up chunks of chuck roast with thyme, Mrs. Dash's table blend, onion powder. Let's remove our bay leaf right here. Beautiful. We have got carrots, onions, celery, purple cabbage, so it's going to give it a nice purple hue to the broth as well. Fresh tomatoes, and then again we use some tomato paste to add this rich kind of tomato flavor to the beef broth. We're going to garnish it with a little bit of grated fresh Parmesan cheese, which will just add a little extra pop of flavor, and we will serve it with a nice big slice of our homemade freshly baked sourdough bread on there. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining us here. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I try to do live cooking shows every single day, kind of show you what we're making for our family and hopefully teach you guys something along the way. Again, we do upload all of our videos to the link on our page, so if you ever want to recreate any of our recipes, you can always go to that page, search for what we made, and watch and cook along with me again. We also have a link to our Amazon storefront that has all of our different cooking gear and gadgets in there. So I've got my mixers, my Le Creuset pots, my knives, my Dutch ovens, all the different gadgets I use in the kitchen I have in there for you guys to check out. But again, thank you so much for joining us here today. Don't forget, we will be baking up our chocolate chip cookies tonight with our dinner stream. But again, thank you for joining us here. Don't forget to like and subscribe.